Policies and assessments. Great discussions. I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. My name is Jeremy Klomp. My Chinese name is Kong Jian Min. Kong to the Kong, Jian Shou Jian Run Min to Min. I'll do my little bit of background first, then I'll give this kind of a roadmap of where we're gonna go tonight. And it could go a lot of different directions. First, I just retired from the Air Force, U.S. Air Force recently. 2 years ago, I started my Air Force career in 1992. And when I started learning Chinese, you had to pick a language at the Air Force Academy. There was only 7 options, and Chinese I thought was the most interesting and had the most long-term benefit for me. And I turned out I really loved it. I really enjoyed learning Chinese. It's one of my best classes. I ended up minoring in it, which is basically just one class every semester. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but I'll go through just a little bit of my background, then I'll get back to the Chinese stuff. When I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1998, I went into the space and nuclear career field, which includes everything from nuclear missile launching and maintenance to satellite command and control, monitoring space junk or missile early warning, a lot of different things. So I was in that career field, which was a lot of fun. I didn't do a lot in that career field. I was more into the international affairs, international relations area. As the next bullet is, I got a scholarship right in the middle of my career to go study in China at Shanghai Fudan Daxue, where I studied, and I got an MBA in Chinese. Lots of 150 classmates. I was the only Westerner. It was a lot of fun. Zoe Zhang Lao Shi asked how I learned Chinese. It was a combination of things. The minor helped, got me started. I was a missionary in Taiwan for 2 years, 94 to 96. And that's what I think I learned it, because on the street, talking to people every day, I learned that my 2 years of classroom time leading up to that was worth about 3 months on the street. So in 3 months, I'd surpassed everything I'd done in the classroom. And in another 3 months, I could do whatever I needed to in Chinese. So 6 months of total immersion is worth 4 or 5 years in the classroom. So if you really want to learn a language, go live it. And when you have to learn, speak your language to eat, it comes pretty quickly. So that's how I learned my Chinese. I also did a year of the United States Air Force, or it's actually an Army Defense Language Institute in preparation to go to Shanghai. So that was that. And then I also spent later, was it 2012 to 15, I was in Taiwan again as the Air Attaché, which is the formal liaison between the US and the Taiwan Air Force, where again, I use my Chinese every day and just had a really great experience. I took my family, I've got 5 kids, girl, boy, girl, girl, girl. So all boys but 4. And they are, oldest one just turned 20, I have an 18-year-old, a 16-year-old, 13 and 11. So they're all just having lots of fun. Currently, I work for a charter school organization, and my specific role, I do a lot of things, business development. We're opening new schools every year, but I also bring in foreign exchange students. That's how Zhang Lao Shi and I met, is bringing some students on short-term camps, as well as some long-term exchange students. And I'll talk about that at the end, how the things we're going to talk about today will impact and have impacted the foreign exchange opportunities for you. Back to Chinese a little bit. Yeah, you really learn it by doing it, just like anything else. We talked a little bit about Malcolm Gladwell earlier today. You become an expert at something by, his posit is that it takes at least 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert, become one of the best in something. And then I read another book today. It's called Peak by Anders Ericsson. He says it's deliberate practice, not just practice. Because you practice doing the wrong thing, you're not going to become very good at it. You're just wasting your time. You need to have deliberate practice where you're doing the right things. Okay, so next slide, please, Rudi. Thanks. And this is just going to be kind of a roadmap of where we'll go today, and then we'll go into each slide on some specific interest areas in each of these. So culture, we'll talk about cultures, what's different and similar between China and Taiwan. We won't go into any politics there. But we will talk about some of the differences. And we'll talk about international relations. That's what I did for the majority of my Air Force career, even though my career field was space. And I'm going to apologize up front. I do talk quickly. I talk fast. I know that. I'm trying to slow down. If it gets too fast, when I get excited, I talk fast. And these topics are exciting to me. So I'll try to get as much in as we can in the little bit of time that we have. All right, so we'll talk about some international relations. What is the relationship, and what impacts the U.S.-China relationship? We'll talk about some politics. What is international politics? How is it different from normal domestic politics? And then again, how some of those things will impact foreign exchange programs that some of us are interested in. Okay, Rudi, next one, thanks. All right, culture. What is culture? I'm looking at some notes too. So culture are the customs, arts, and institutions that, or even achievements of a particular nation or group of people or a social group. And so whether it's the Chinese culture or American culture, or even more specifically, what is the Shanghai culture or the Beijing culture, and how are those different? What is the US culture? Or I grew up in Nevada. Nevada culture is vastly different from New York culture. And there are things that impact these both on a large scale and a small scale. And changes can occur to your culture, but it takes a lot of time. The biggest example, the greatest example of a cultural shift and change, I think, in my mind, is the difference between China, where it is today, and Taiwan, because they start out the same. The majority of the people in Taiwan went there in 1949 after the end of World War II, and the communists took over mainland. And the Mao made a concerted effort to alter and change the culture in China. And he was very successful in doing that through the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Whereas Taiwan made a significant effort to retain and maintain the traditional Chinese culture. And so over the years of the 5-year plans and the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, China has altered its culture from the Confucian ancestral worship, Buddhist type filial piety type culture to a more modern culture. At least that's how it's described by Chinese and in China, that is different from what it was 50 or 100 years ago. Whereas if you go to Taiwan, you can still see a lot of those things active in their lives. There are Buddhist temples all over the place. There's the significant ancestor worship, the Confucian relationships of father, son, husband, wife, ruler, subject, friend to friend, and then senior to junior or elder to younger are still present and venerated in Taiwan. Whereas they're still present in China, it's much less emphasized, and it's more the state and the collective is what's important. And so they like I said, it was a conscious decision to alter that culture, and it took many years, but it has been effective in making those changes. Positive or not, I'll let you guys be the judge of that. But there's no denying that there is a difference between the culture in Taiwan and the culture in China. Some of those we'll touch on, just a couple of those. I want, like I said, politics. We'll leave politics for the politicians, at least in this area. But some differences mentioned that the group think. Communist China, it's all about the collective and the group, and the individual has little value in the communist culture, and that's what it's designed for. The goal is to preserve the whole, sometimes at the sacrifice of some of the individuals' of liberties and rights and whatnot. And an example of that is the way, for example, if you've been to the subway in Beijing, it's a mess. There's just people everywhere. There's no lines, no one paidways. It's kind of everyone is out for him or herself, because that's what the communist government has taught them, that the culture matters, that the communal good matters, not the individual. And so if I don't matter and you don't matter, it doesn't matter if I wait for you in line, because as individuals we're nothing. It's the group that's important. So as a group, we're gonna push together and try to really kind of look out for yourself. Whereas in Taiwan, if you go to the metro or the subway in Taiwan, there's feet marks painted in the line, and people actually stand in line. There's no pushing and shoving. If the train car comes and several people get on, looks pretty full, the person waiting line, so I'll just wait for the next one. And they're very much more cordial, in my experience, than people in China. And I think it is based on the communist instruction. That's just my opinion. That's how things are. Let's see, another difference. When I lived in China, the foreigners were kind of segregated. I'm sure it's different now, because it was 15 years ago I lived in China. Everyone I lived in my compound was a foreigner, whether they were from Russia or Europe, anywhere. Even other Asian peoples were in our compound, and there were no Chinese that lived there. Whereas in Taiwan, when I lived in Taiwan, our neighbors in our same apartment building, there were Taiwanese, Chinese, Malays. Everyone just is more integrated. Like I said, this is my experience in Shanghai was 15 years ago, but we were different, and we were seen as outsiders, and it's nearly impossible for someone to become a Chinese. You can't immigrate to China and become a Chinese. You can always be a permanent resident, cold hard card holder, but it's not the United States where you can become a United States citizen. I could never go to China and become a Chinese citizen. Whereas Taiwan, through my work with the Air Force and some events that happened there, I was awarded. It's actually called the Order of the Cloud and Banner, where I've got permanent residency in Taiwan. Should I choose to go back and live there, and I would be welcomed into their community much more and accepted than I would in China. A little tangent didn't plan on, but that's kind of how things are. Sorry. All right, so China is new communal modern culture, whereas Taiwan has preserved the traditional Chinese culture, if you will, and where you can still see a lot of ancient China, particularly when they took everything from the National Palace Museum in Beijing and opened another museum in Taiwan with all the national treasures of China. So all those were preserved and survived the Cultural Revolution because of that event. All right, that's probably enough culture. Let's next slide, please, Rudi. Thanks. All right, talking about, let me get over here to my other notes. International relations. All right, so first, let's talk about a relationship. What is a relationship? And it's really the way that two people or things are connected and interact. And so there are a lot of factors that influence that. As you know, because through your relationships with your friends, your family, your teachers at school, and all those are a little bit different types of relationships. And no two relationships are the same. They might have similar factors or similar pieces, but every individual is different. All circumstances are slightly different, and no two relationships are exactly the same. And so similarly, the way that we interact as countries is termed international relations. And those international relationships are based on the interactions and the connections between not only the leaders of those entities and countries, but the formal delegations that go out there. Let's see. I had an example, but I don't remember my prompt. Okay, let me. So when I was living in China, I'll give you an example. Living in China, we were, like I said, we were kind of outsiders. We tried to integrate as much as we could, but we lived in a foreigner-only area, and so we had three little kids at the time. We had a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a new baby, which, as you know, in China with the one-child policy at that time, was unheard of. But the first word my wife learned was three. Look at that, 3 kids. They have 3 kids. And so if we'd go for a walk with our double stroller and a baby on the chest pack, and if we stopped walking on the sidewalk, we would stop traffic. The crowd would gather. One time we were just surrounded immediately by like 10 rows of people, just a huge circle of people all trying to look at it and touch and take pictures of our 3 little blonde kids, because they just don't see it very much. A lot of business people over there, and there's a lot of expats living there, but not often did they, at least at that time, see foreign little blonde kids walking in a double stroller with another one on the chest. And so we were a novelty. And what I've learned from that, and this is kind of the difference between international relations between people versus governments, and this kind of what overlays into the politics a little bit, is that the people, we had great friends in China who were Chinese. We had great relationships, and the people were very friendly, very welcoming, and the relationships between people and governments are vastly different. China and the US have always had kind of a tenuous relationship. They want to be friends, but they don't want to commit to things that friends do for each other, in my opinion. And so there's always been a little bit of mistrust and distrust and strained relations. Whereas the people, I've got great friends that I would do anything for, just as good as my good friends here in the United States. And the difference is just that the people are people wherever they are. There's a saying in Chinese, let's see, what is that one? Wang zi cheng wang, wang nu cheng feng. And that's the same wherever you go in the world. And it means we hope our sons become dragons and our daughters become phoenixes. We want the best things for our kids. And as I talk with my Chinese friends and counterparts and at work and in classes, our desires and hopes and dreams were the same. And so we got along very great because we had so many things in common. We want good things for our families. We want to have a good job. We want to be able to take care of our needs. But it's the governments who see things differently, and the relationships between the governments were very, very different, strained and challenging, whereas the relationships between our families and friends were just different. All right, so back to the relationship questions. What can I, as an individual, do to influence my relationships? Well, you can have positive interactions and make positive connections with those with whom you have relationships. And so you can, one of the schools we manage have values that we teach to our kids every week. And there are 5, and it's the first letter of each one spells out RAISE. So we call them our RAISE values. The first is respect, accountability, integrity, service, and excellence. And so as you demonstrate those values, you have respect for your peers and your parents and your teachers. You treat them with respect. You have accountability for your actions. You demonstrate integrity by being truthful. You serve one another, and then you always strive for excellence. Those things will help influence your relationships for the better. It'll help you have positive relationships. You'll if you don't lie to your friends, they're going to trust you. If you do lie to them, they're not going to hang around you because they can't trust what you say, and your relationship will go south. So there are many things you can do as an individual to influence and impact your relationships, both for good and not so good. All right. So what impacts do international relationships? How's our time looking? We're still good. Okay. What impacts international relationships? The actions of either party. And whenever China does something, or whenever the United States does something, the other country reacts. If we do something good, we lower tariffs, or we lower the requirements for a visa, usually the other one will make a corresponding change. And if we raise prices of our visas, China will raise the price of their visas. And so everything that we do kind of impacts that relationship, just like with your friends. Your interaction with your friends impacts your relationship. Similarly, things that our governments do, whether it's a president in a speech slandering or bad-mouthing China, President Xi will do the same thing. It'll negatively impact the relationship. Whereas if the president is talking up what a great relationship we have, we're going to reduce our tariffs and whatnot, President Xi would likely do some corresponding actions, and those things that impact our relationships. And that kind of gets into the politics. Let's go to the next slide, Rudy. Thanks. So politics. Let's see. Let me change my slide over here to politics. Then is activities that are aimed at improving someone's status or position. And generally, when you're speaking in English, if someone is politicking, it's generally considered to be not necessarily above board, devious or divisive. But the other definition of politics would be activities of governments concerning political relations between countries. And so it's aimed at improving your situation. And I put a note on there that politicians act in their own country or constituents' best interests. Just like if you're in a business relationship, you're gonna do something that is in your best interest, because otherwise you'd go out of business if you didn't do things that were in your own best interest. And so politicians, their job is to represent their constituents and do things in their best interest. And so international politics is very complicated because what might be in our best interest in the short term, as Rudi mentioned, it may not be in our best interest in the long term, but politicians are typically short-sighted. They only see as far as the next election cycle. And so it's hard for a politician to do something that's going to be great for the United States in 10 years, but less great in the next 2 to 4 years. And so they generally choose the easier short road than the harder long road. And I put in the next comment says, where you stand depends on where you sit. And if you've ever been in a debate class, you know exactly what that means, because you might be on Monday, for example, you're assigned to defend position A. Then you go back to class on Tuesday, Wednesday. Okay, now you're attacking position A, and your arguments that you develop and present are based on your position. And so where you stand in this instance means what is my position, and sit is actually the physical position. So if you're in the United States at the right side of the aisle, you're generally, for example, opposed to abortion. Whereas if you're on the left side of the aisle, you're in favor of abortion. And so where you sit determines your position on different things. So where you stand depends on where you sit. And to illustrate this, I've got a quick story of 2 of my Chinese teachers. When I returned from Taiwan, I had 2 Chinese teachers. My first 2 Chinese teachers were actually not Chinese, but they had really good Chinese. That when I got back from China or Taiwan, I had 2 different teachers, both from China. both teaching Chinese at the Air Force Academy. The first one was her parents were in the military, and so she grew up, had a very, very privileged life, living on bases, had nice clothes, great food, good location, and went to the best schools and was very well taken care of because her father was a high-ranking officer in the military. And so, of course, she loved China. China's great. China takes great care of its people. Love it. Whereas the other one, her father was a college professor. And this, remember, is several years ago. So I went to college. This was in 1996. And she was already an adult by then. So her father grew up, went through the Cultural Revolution and then the Great Leap Forward and those type of issues in China where college professors, it wasn't good for them. And so he was sent to re-education camp. And so her view of the Chinese government was, well, they took my father away. We were hungry because we couldn't get good jobs because he was an educated person. And so, yeah, I don't love the Chinese government as much as my colleague here who thinks the Chinese government is great. So two Chinese people, vastly different experiences and different opinions in China. So, all right, moving on. How do politics impact me, or do they impact me? Do decisions that President Xi makes about China, about the United States, and President Trump or President Obama make about China impact me personally and specifically? The big answer is yes, but the more in-depth answer is it's hard to say and hard to determine where those impacts are. The cost of my goods might be a little bit more, but really how much does that change? Might be harder to travel, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But the international politics are it's very, very complicated because one small sentence in a speech by the president might upset President Xi and he'll make some changes. And so it's very complicated. Had another friend while I was working in China who was worked in the embassy, and actually the ambassador Huntsman several years ago, he'd ride his bike over to the Chinese embassy to get demarched because we sold weapons to Taiwan or something like that. And there's a big show of we were very upset about this, and then business is going to go on as normal. So it's hard to say how much those big decisions and things impact us really on a day-to-day basis. I'm talking really fast and I apologize. Let me just quickly look at some of the questions before I talk about the foreign exchange students. Let me get my mouse over, the 3 screens up.
I think for the most part, we might be better off coming to whatever questions we can when you finish the presentation, because none of them are like really on point to what you're speaking about. So
yep, okay, sounds
we
good.
can get to them after.
Very good, I appreciate that. Okay, just one more quick slide and then we'll get to some questions. All right, so actually there's 2 more slides. How does the current political environment impact me? And this goes also, we'll reach into the how does it impact the foreign exchange travel. First, COVID, as you know, this year is not normal. All the rules are accepted and nothing is playing how it's supposed to. Embassies are closed. Oh, this is my last slide. That's right. Okay, good. I was looking at my other one. Embassies are closed, so it's hard to get visas and travel. The economy is impacted, which reduces your ability to pay tuition at a good private school in the United States or even in China. There's familial concerns. I don't want to travel and then bring something home to my grandma and make her sick and die, or I don't want to take something that I might have in my community out to somewhere else. We had several of our students coming from Europe that said, oh, I want to bring whatever's in Germany to the US, so I'll cancel my exchange year. And so again, it's complicated. There are some impacts as far as the COVID rules or the situation. As far as politically, President Trump did cancel 5 cultural exchanges, but those were specific government exchanges where students would go and interact with government leaders. As far as day-to-day international travel for normal foreign exchange students, it didn't impact us very much at all. It's just the COVID situation that has changed things right now. So, and with that, let's go back to some questions and see what we can do.
All right. Okay, so maybe I'll kind of MC some of these questions. Bruce asks, does Taiwan tend to have more Western cultural influence than mainland China?
That's a great question. And the answer as to most questions is it depends. So there are some areas in China that are significantly impacted by the Western culture. Like Shanghai, for example, is a very Western city. There's still some old holdouts and things that are more Chinese. And Beijing has areas that are like the old style China. So the big cities in China have a lot of Western influence, whereas Taiwan, most of the country is pretty well influenced by the United States in the West. Taiwan was one of our allies in World War II, and we had bases there, and we kept our people there until 1979 when President Carter recognized the communist government of China instead of the nationalist government, and we withdrew everything from Taiwan. But some of the examples of Western influence are they used the same power as the United States, 110 versus 220. They drive on the right side of the road, whereas most island nations that were impacted by Great Britain would drive on the left side. Everyone in Taiwan speaks a little bit of English. You can get around there very easily, not speaking any Chinese, whereas there are places in China you can do that. But if you get outside of the big cities, you need to be able to speak Chinese, otherwise you're going to be hungry.
I've had that experience.
Yeah, but yeah, so yes, Taiwan is significantly impacted by the West, more broadly than China. China is impacted, but just in the big cities, whereas Taiwan, the whole country, has some significant Western impacts.
All right, great. And just to remind people, we've only got about 5 more minutes or so left. So, it's a good time to if you have questions, get them in the queue so that we can get to them. So Ernest mentions sort of different cities have different cultures that you mentioned, that Shanghai is different than Beijing. He asked what you think creates those cultures. I mean, my sense is actually that's really something that you experience almost anywhere you would go in the world. Like any country I've ever been to, if you travel that country and you visit multiple cities, you learn that those cities have a different feel to them in the same way that traveling around the United States has very different feels to them. And, even in Canada, Toronto is a very different place than most of the other cities. If you were to, especially if you were to go to Quebec, where people are speaking French, but even if you just went to Calgary, Calgary feels different right away. And the people, as soon as they know you're from Toronto, will, tell you how they're different. So I think that's not sort of unique to China or Taiwan. That's sort of unique to just the fact that cities in many ways are living organisms that evolve their own culture and personalities over time, and their own histories and their own pride and their own way of life. Okay, so Matthew asks, I could let you answer this, but he says, in your opinion, do you recognize Taiwan as the real China or the People's Republic as the real China?
That's a great question. The official United States position is we recognize one China and we're not going to define it. Which is very, very political, right? A political statement. We're not going to say what we think. We support both governments, recognize both governments. We have a de facto embassy in Taiwan as well as China. So it's a sticky situation that we're going to kind of let China resolve that on their own. If I could ask one thing back to the last question, though, China in the old days, they had every city was its own little mini nation, complete with their own language. And so if you go to Shanghai, they speak Shanghainese and Mandarin. If you go to Fujian, they speak Fujianese and Mandarin. Beijing, where the emperor lived, he says everyone, once he consolidated power, he said everyone's going to learn my language, which is the Mandarin dialect. And so in Beijing, they only speak Mandarin because that is the Beijing language. And so while what you said is exactly true, it's even more so in China because they started off as their own little countries and they kept some of that culture as they developed. And so that there are many cultures within Shanghai that are not necessarily found outside of China, in addition to the development of a city.
Yeah, that's very true. And it definitely goes well past what we describe as regional accents into absolutely like an entirely different dialect. Like, if you're, like Italy or Italian is to Spanish or Spanish is to French.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So Thomas has a question that I think you've sort of answered, because he says, is Taiwan considered part of China? And I think there is an official position on that. And then there are differences of opinion depending on which government you happen to be asking that question of.
It's true. And if you ask the people, it's a different answer as well. So most of the people in mainland China will say, yes, of course, Taiwan is part of China. And even many of the people in Taiwan will say, yes, of course, we're part of China, we're Chinese. But the younger generation is now saying, no, we're Taiwanese. We're not the Aboriginal Taiwanese who were there or went over with Zhongcheng in the 1600s, but we're descended from the Chinese. We're developing our own culture since we've been separated now since 1949. That's 71 years. That's a long time to try to maintain the same ties. Even families who are separated, they go back together and they don't even recognize each other just because of the cultural differences. So again, it's an interesting situation.
So Enzo asked, will China invade Taiwan in the future and annex it in the future?
We hope not. We hope that it can be resolved amicably. Already, China has become China's largest trading partner, surpassing the United States several years ago, and not by a little bit. It's a huge difference. And so that China and Taiwan are tied at the hip, as far as Taiwan's concerned, economically. And now they're just moving towards more political solutions. The leaders have met for the first time ever 4 or 5 years ago, and so they've taken good steps to peaceful reunification. So we hope they don't invade. Yeah, that's where we'll leave it.
Yeah, and as somebody who was in the Air Force for so long, I'm sure you're probably also fairly familiar with the idea that would be a particularly nasty war.
It really would,
given the amount of weaponry that is parked in that region, and that Taiwan's defense is mainly only for one purpose, and so it's all pointed in one direction, and it's all designed for preservation. So, and it's pretty good equipment based on where it's from.
Right.
All right. So Ken asks, there is an increase in tension between China and Taiwan regarding the U.S.'s position right now. What do you think will happen because of this situation? And I guess the situation being described is maybe just increasing recognition of independent status would be my guess. Like, I know the U.S. has sent over higher level diplomats than it did previously, like the Secretary of State and things like that, to meet with.
Yep. When I was there, we never had official envoys. We'd have congressional delegations would come and visit, but there was not any communication between the president of Taiwan and the president of the United States. And so when Tsai Ing-wen, the president of Taiwan, who's the Minjindang, the Progressive Party, called the president, that was a groundbreaking and raised tensions a little bit. What most likely happened is China did demarche the United States, which is scold them, say, stay out of our internal affairs. And it won't go much farther than that, depending on how President Biden will be. And that's the next question. Matthew says, will Biden be good for China-U.S. relations? Hard to say. With some of the allegations are going around with his son, he might try to distance himself a little bit. And so it's just we'll have to see what happens. Again, the politics makes things crazy.
Yeah, I think, Biden's initial inclination during, in the first stages of the campaign trail was to say that, he'd had this better relation with China. And then I think his advisors looking at polling data said, Trump's really changed the temperature on how people feel about China. And if you're going to win those people in the middle, which became very, very few people by election day, said, one of the things that could push them either way is what you say about China. And he's clearly taken a bit of a stronger stance. Mm-hmm. And we'll want to have a better relationship, but we'll also not want to seem as though he is just conceding and going back to the way things were. Even if the way things were good, there's now a general perception that they weren't. Yep. So it has to be something different than the way things were, but better. And it's a very tough line to walk, for sure.
Absolutely, and it depends on your perspective. What was it good before? Is it good now? Things like that. So
we could probably maybe do one or two more of these. So Max is asking, do you think any current acts in the South China Sea are working to de-escalate or escalate the situation? Is it likely for Biden to take perhaps weaker stance against China, and would that influence China to perhaps take more bolder risks and moves? So that kind of piggybacks on what we just talked about.
Right. Yes. I don't see China backing down very much, but I also don't see President Biden potentially doing anything about it. President Obama didn't do much, which is why they were kind of China was emboldened to do some more what it's doing in the South China Sea. And I don't see that slowing down either from the Chinese side or from the United States side. So it'll probably just continue to go. And it does escalate a little bit because all the countries in the South China Sea are irritated by that. More than irritated, but they really can't do anything because they're much weaker than China. So
yeah, there was actually an interesting article in the issue of The Economist we were discussing, and I don't have a chance to get to all of them, but it was about how China has integrated the Coast Guard into its military, and so that essentially allows the Coast Guard to take more military actions So its mandate is now far broader than just search and rescue or a defense role, and it actually is authorized for offensive moves in the South China Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the Coast Guard ships are identical to its warships. They just are painted white and say Coast Guard now, which to be fair, in the article does point out is something that most other countries do as well. Yeah. So China was somewhat unique in the way it classified its Coast Guard and limited it, and it in many ways just brought it in line with the same authorizations and equipment that other Coast Guards have. Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Organized country. So maybe the last one we'll do is Oliver asks, could you explain the age different effects, the younger generation, and do you think that this is a broader concern for countries? And I guess this is related specifically to what you said about the perspectives of younger Taiwanese versus older Taiwanese.
Okay, so in general, youth they have more access to information than we did when we were young. And so, whereas in my generation, we'd go to the library and read books or read newspapers and read magazines. Now, particularly in Taiwan, you can read anything, anytime on your phone. And so they're more educated, but they're also developing their own culture. After 70 years, I think things change a little bit, even though they still have the traditional Chinese culture of Confucianism and ancestor worship, things like that. They're changing, and they're developing their own identity as Taiwanese, specifically. We could answer this question in a lot of different ways, a lot of different countries, but specifically with Taiwan, they're becoming more Taiwanese just by the fact that they haven't had a lot of interaction with China to maintain those ties and that identity. And so I don't necessarily know that as it's a concern. It's just a fact that people change over time, and this generation is growing up only knowing, hey, we're Taiwan. We live in Taiwan. We have our own money. We have our own military. We have our own government. We're Taiwanese. We have the Chinese background heritage. Both China and Taiwan celebrate Sun Yat-sen as the founder of their country, but then they start to diverge from there, where it's Chiang Kai-shek versus Mao Zedong and all the progression from there. But it's maybe not really necessarily concerning, just an interesting development and trend as you grow up as well. You'll identify with your experiences. We are the sum of our experiences. Learning English will generally makes you more friendly towards English-speaking countries because you have something in common. You've spent some effort and invested yourself in that area, and so you'll be a little bit more tolerant or accepting of English culture because you have that investment. Same thing with anything you study and learn about, you'll become invested in it, and not necessarily be softer, but have an affinity for it, basically. And so as Taiwanese grow up learning about Taiwan, again, they have that affinity for Taiwan and less so for China. So it's just a development. Whether it impacts the future reunification of China, it'll be what remains to be seen.
All right, we should probably wrap things up there, Jeremy. I want to thank you very much, and I think this was great. We really appreciate you joining us today. And Ye, I think you wanted to make a few closing remarks.
Yes. So thank you so much, like both Rudi and Jeremy. And like I know you have answered a lot of questions, and still more questions being unanswered. And so today, like for this, like our special like lecture course, and it's the second last of this year. And many students have been asking the plan for next year, and so I have like promotion going on. And please like maybe sign up with a friend. Next year we're going to have like even more interesting articles to share, and also a lot of like guest speakers will come and to make this like very like quite like learning journey and for everyone. Rudi, do you have anything to add?
No, I'm looking forward to doing this again next year. We do still have the big kind of year, the 2021, the year ahead episode as well as next week. So those will be great. But I'm looking forward to this now being a more regular thing that will sign people up for a whole 2021 year worth of discussions and bring in more guest speakers. And as I've mentioned a few times, and I mentioned a lot at the beginning, really the key to this course is not coming to one class or sort of hearing a discussion, as much as that can be really interesting. The key to learning something is particularly something as complex as everything that's happening in the world that matters, is learning a little bit more about it each week. And so reading something like The Economist or other news sources with some regularity, even if they sometimes seem a bit confusing, over time you start to build up that foundation of understanding, and you get to see how all of these things are connected in different ways, and you get better at understanding why something is happening, and you get better at being able to anticipate and think about what the consequences are going to be. So I'm looking forward to continuing to do that with everyone.
Yeah, so personally, and I start with the first
opportunities to come and chat with you guys. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Thank you. Good night. Yeah, we'll be in touch. Bye. And like personally, I start from the first like lecture until now. I feel I learned a lot, and perspective gets changed, and so it's like gradual process, and like we all should become a lifelong learners. And so thank you so much, and for offering like this opportunity, and also thank you for being here tonight. So good night, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.